A country that was once flattened by bombs, forced to sign a constitution that says it must never wage war again, is now preparing to deploy long-range missiles that can reach China and North Korea, joining Britain and Italy to develop the next generation of fighter jets, and aiming to become one of the 3 biggest military spenders in the world. For decades, Japan has been known for anime, games, sushi, and technology, not for tanks and warships. But if you look at the budget numbers, the weapons plans, and the newest strategic documents, you will see a very different Japan. Harder, sharper, more ready for war than at any time since 1945. Why is this gentle nation now being described by newspapers as undergoing the biggest rearmament since World War II? Is Japan really rising again as a new military monster, or is that just the fear of neighbors who were once occupied by Tokyo? To answer that, we have to go back in time, look at the historical shock that created post-war Japan, and then follow the layers of geopolitical pressure that are pushing the country out of the pacifist costume the world thought was permanent. Before 1945, Japan was not a gentle power at all. It was an imperial, militarist state where the army and navy dominated politics, and where brutal invasions swept through China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Tokyo challenged the West in the Pacific, attacked Pearl Harbor, and dreamed of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere under Japanese leadership. In Asia, memories of World War II are memories of the Japanese military, not only tanks and planes, but massacres, forced labor, and women enslaved as comfort women. For South Korea, China, the Philippines, Taiwan, the image of a Japanese military monster is not a movie metaphor, it is part of family history. The catastrophic defeat of 1945 destroyed that entire structure. 2 atomic bombs, cities burned to the ground, millions dead, and US occupation forces ruling the country forced Japan to redefine itself. The result was the 1947 Constitution with the famous Article 9, Japan forever renounces war, shall not maintain land, sea, or air forces, and does not recognize the right of belligerency of the state. On paper, Japan became a country without an army, only with police, not allowed to use force to settle disputes. For many Japanese, especially the generation who lived through the war, Article 9 was not just a legal clause, it was a moral confession. But the world did not stand still so that Japan could live forever inside that idealistic bubble. Just a few years later, the Cold War erupted, the Korean War broke out, and China became a communist state. The United States, the same occupying power that helped write Article 9, suddenly realized it needed Japan not as a peace paradise, but as a strategic outpost against the Soviet Union and China in Asia. From a national police reserve, Japan gradually built up the Japan Self-Defense Forces JSDF under a very harmless-sounding name, self-defense, not army. Over the next decades, an unspoken bargain took shape. The United States provided the security umbrella, troops, nuclear weapons, and defense guarantees, while Japan focused on economic growth, keeping its defense budget minimal, usually around 1% of GDP. Japan became an economic giant, military dwarf, a leading producer of cars, electronics, and robots, but very reluctant to send troops abroad, even for UN peacekeeping. In the 1991 Gulf War, Tokyo was criticized for checkbook diplomacy, writing massive checks but sending no soldiers because its constitution and public opinion simply did not allow it. This used to fit the mood of society. Many Japanese believed that no military, no war, that staying far away from conflict was the best way to atone to Asia. Protests against US bases and against any overseas deployment of troops were common. In the eyes of Europeans and Americans, Japan gradually shifted from frightening aggressor to gentle, sometimes naive power in foreign policy. But in the 21st century, The security environment around Japan has changed so fast that the old model began to crack. China has risen as a superpower, ramping up defense spending, modernizing its navy and air force, and sending ships and planes close to the Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, which both Tokyo and Beijing claim. North Korea has tested nuclear weapons and fired missiles that fly right over Japan. Russia, after annexing Crimea and then launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, has increased its military presence in the Far East and around the disputed Coral Islands. At the same time, the Taiwan Strait has become more tense, and any conflict there could potentially drag Japan in. Meanwhile, the Japanese public has started to doubt how eternal the American security umbrella really is. America First slogans and comments from Washington questioning the cost of defending allies who do not spend on their own defense made Tokyo realize that being protected for free is no longer a sustainable option. With an economy heavily dependent on sea lanes passing through the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca, and with major cities within range of Chinese and North Korean missiles, the question is no longer should we increase military power, but what happens if we wait too long? Under that pressure, Japan has begun loosening its pacifist straitjacket step by step. A crucial turning point came in 2014 when the Shinzo Abe government reinterpreted Article 9 to allow Japan to exercise collective self-defense, meaning it could use force to help an ally when Japan's own security is threatened, instead of purely defensive use of force on its own territory. Security laws passed in 2015 allowed the self-defense forces to provide logistics, protect allied ships and aircraft, and take part in broader international missions. Hundreds of thousands protested, calling it a betrayal of the peace constitution, but the wheel of history had started to turn. The climax of this shift came in December 2022, when Japan unveiled three major documents at once: a new national security strategy, a national defense strategy, and a defense build-up program. For the first time, Tokyo announced that it would increase overall security-related spending, including defense, to around 2% of GDP by fiscal year 2027, in line with NATO standards, and allocate enormous sums for defense over the 2023 to 2027 period. Observers called it Japan's biggest rearmament since World War II. What truly shocked the region, however, was not just the money, but how Japan plans to spend it. The new strategy openly talks about acquiring counter-strike capabilities, the ability to hit enemy missile bases if Japan faces an imminent attack. Tokyo decided to purchase Tomahawk cruise missiles from the US and to upgrade and deploy longer-range versions of its Type 12 missiles on the mainland and on Southwest Islands, with ranges up to about 1,000 kilometers, enough to reach the Chinese coast or North Korean facilities. In parallel, Japan is investing heavily in air and missile defense, stealth F-35 fighters, Aegis destroyers, as well as space and cyber warfare capabilities, and is joining the GCAP program with the UK and Italy to develop a next-generation fighter. It has relaxed arms export rules, opened defense exhibitions, and invited hundreds of international companies to Tokyo to showcase radar systems, sensors, drones, and more. A picture is emerging of an industrial defense Japan that looks very different from the country that supposedly only makes robots and cameras. So what is the deeper driver behind this transformation? On the surface, the answer seems simple: China, North Korea, and Russia. In its 2020 to security strategy, Tokyo describes its security environment as the most severe and complex since World War II, calls China its greatest strategic challenge, points to North Korea's frequent missile launches over Japanese territory, and cites the war in Ukraine as a stark reminder that aggressive war is still entirely possible in the 21st century. But at a deeper level, this is about the anxiety of an aging great power. Japan has a large economy, but its population is shrinking rapidly, its society is aging, and its public debt is huge. A country like that understands that if war comes, it will struggle to sustain a long conflict. The security logic is therefore, either you are strong enough to deter from the beginning, and make any adversary think twice before firing the first shot, or you accept becoming a victim. In the minds of many Japanese strategists, being weak but kind is no longer a moral choice. It is a dangerous one. The American factor is also decisive. For decades, the US-Japan alliance has been the backbone of East Asian security. The US provided the nuclear umbrella and the main fighting force, while Japan provided bases, logistics, and political support. But as Washington signals that allies must share the burden, and as the US stretches its resources between Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific, Tokyo has realized that relying completely on America is a gamble. Building up its own military power is therefore both a way to reassure Washington and a kind of insurance in case one day the US steps back or reduces its commitment. This does not mean all of Japan is happy to enter a hardline era. The country remains deeply divided internally. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party has long wanted to revise Article 9, or at least explicitly recognize the self-defense forces as constitutional, while its coalition partner Komeito and opposition parties tend to be more cautious. Polls show a complex picture. People are increasingly worried about the security environment, support higher defense spending, and even support Japan having counter-strike capabilities, but strongly oppose tax hikes to pay for a swelling military bill. On a psychological level, Japanese society is being pulled between two poles: the horrific memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of a militarist Japan hated by its neighbors, and the very real fear of becoming a target of missiles, submarines, and fighter jets in a future conflict. Anti-war protests still exist. Intellectuals, religious groups, and civil society organizations continue to defend the peace constitution as something unique and precious in Japan's identity. At the same time, images of the war in Ukraine, news about North Korean missile tests, and Chinese aircraft approaching Japan's airspace make the slogan of absolute peace feel less and less sufficient to reassure the public. Economics is another hard constraint. To reach 2% of GDP on defense, the government has to find money in a budget already stretched by social spending for the elderly and by interest payments on public debt. Debates about raising income taxes, corporate taxes, or tobacco taxes to fund defense have triggered widespreading opposition. Japan is also trying to use bonds, cut other spending, and expand its defense industry, including via arms exports and international cooperation, to share the burden. All of this brings us back to the original question: is Japan rising again as a military monster? If you look at it in absolute terms, the answer may well be not to that extent. Even at 2% of GDP, its defense budget would still be far below that of the US and China, and Japan does not possess nuclear weapons. Tokyo's official strategy continues to emphasize defense, deterrence, and tight adherence to international law and the US-Japan alliance. Japan is a democracy with a public extremely sensitive to war, a free media, and a civil society whose voice still matters. But if you look from the perspective of Seoul, Beijing, Taipei, or Manila, the picture changes. For them, any sign of a stronger Japanese military, more destroyers in the South and East China Seas, longer-range Japanese missiles on the map, stirs up historical trauma that has never truly healed. The idea of a normalizing Japan that many scholars in Tokyo treat as obvious may be seen from abroad as Japan returning to the old path, even though today's political system, context, and strategic goals are very different from the 1930s. For American and European audiences, Japan's military rise is both reassuring and unsettling. On the positive side, a stronger Japan means a more reliable ally in facing pressure from China, taking some weight off Washington's shoulders, much like European countries are being pushed to spend more on defense after Ukraine. On the other hand, too many weapons and too many actors willing to intervene mean that any crisis around Taiwan, the Senkaku Islands, or the East China Sea can more easily slide from a small clash into a major war involving three of the world's top military powers. If one day a missile is launched from the Korean Peninsula or the Chinese coast, Japanese radar systems will be among the first to detect it. The counterstrike authority that Tokyo is building will not just be words on paper. It will have to be activated within minutes. Behind those decisions will be self-defense forces officers who grew up in a society that taught them about the peace constitution, yet are living in a region where every neighbor is buying more missiles, submarines, and aircraft. What they decide in those minutes will shape not just Japan's future, but the security order of all East Asia, where hundreds of millions live packed into vulnerable coastal megacities. In the end, the story of Japan rising again as a military monster says more about the world around Japan than about Japan itself. After 1945, humanity tried to tie down one of the most aggressive war machines of the century with a pacifist constitution. 70+ years later, it is the unstable world itself, from North Korean missiles and the war in Ukraine to US-China rivalry, that is gradually cutting those ropes, forcing Tokyo to choose between ideals and survival. Japan may never return to the exact monster form it had in the first half of the 20th century, but it will certainly no longer be the pure pacifist angel many people imagined. The more important question, for us, whether we live in the United States, Europe, or anywhere else, is this: will an East Asia filled with stronger armies, longer-range missiles, and tougher counterstrike doctrines actually make the world safer? Or are we entering a new era where peace is once again maintained by mutual fear, the same kind of tense balance that humanity already experienced during the Cold War? The answer to that question will determine whether history records 21st century Japan as a country that simply normalized its power, or as the opening chapter of a new spiral of militarization in Asia.